There's a marketing manager in Austin, Texas, making $87,000 a year. She books a weekend trip to Nashville every few months because she's been grinding all quarter and she earned it. She drives a leased Audi she upgraded into last year after a rough breakup. She deserved a fresh start. She orders the salmon at dinner instead of the pasta because she works hard and she's not going to sit there eating cheap food like she's broke. She bought the Peloton, the standing desk, the skincare routine that runs $340 a month, and the apartment with the exposed brick that costs $600 more than the place 2 streets over. On paper, she's thriving. In reality, she has $1,100 in her savings account and $23,000 in credit card and personal loan debt she's been quietly restructuring for 3 years. According to a 2024 Empower financial study, 65% of Americans earning between $75,000 and $100,000 report living paycheck to paycheck. Read that again. Nearly 2/3 of people earning what most Americans would consider a good income cannot absorb a $1,500 emergency without going into debt. Read that again. The assumption most people carry is that income is the variable, that once you earn enough, the financial stress resolves itself. The data says something completely different. What you're actually watching is called the "I deserve it" trap, the single most socially acceptable, emotionally justified, and financially devastating spending pattern operating in the middle and upper middle class right now. It's not reckless spending. It's rewarded spending. And that distinction is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Today I'm going to show you exactly how this trap works, why your income actually accelerates it, and what it costs you in numbers most people never sit down to calculate. Here's the assumption almost everyone carries into adulthood without ever questioning it. If you work hard, you earn money. If you earn money, you deserve to enjoy it. And enjoying it, really enjoying it, not in a guilty, half-present way, means spending it on things that reflect how hard you worked. The treat, the upgrade, the experience, the thing you've been putting off until you could afford it. That belief sounds reasonable. It sounds healthy, even. Therapists talk about self-care. Financial culture talks about balance. Every ad you've ever seen has been quietly reinforcing the same message. You've earned this. But here is what that assumption destroys, quietly, over time. It converts income into a justification engine. The more you earn, the more you've deserved. The harder your week, the more justified the purchase. The longer you've waited for something, the more emotionally loaded it becomes, and the more financially irrational you're willing to be to get it. The "I deserve it" belief doesn't just explain individual purchases. It becomes the operating system for every financial decision you make under stress, fatigue, or social pressure. And it has a name. Behavioral economists call it reward substitution, the mechanism by which emotional compensation replaces financial logic at the point of purchase. You're not actually buying the thing. You're buying relief from the discomfort of having worked hard without feeling adequately recognized for it. The trap isn't that you spend. The trap is that the spending never actually delivers the reward it promises. Research on hedonic adaptation shows that the emotional lift from a purchase typically fades within 72 hours for most discretionary items. The Peloton stops feeling like self-care by week 3. The Audi becomes the car you're stressed about the payment on. The Nashville trip becomes the credit card balance you're paying off while booking the next one. So the spending increases to chase the reward that keeps disappearing. This is not a willpower problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is a design problem. The belief that spending is the correct response to effort is so embedded in how most people operate financially that they never examine it as a belief at all. It feels like common sense. That's exactly what makes it a trap. People earning $60,000 fall into it. People earning $160,000 fall into it harder because the purchases get larger, the justifications get louder, and the income creates the illusion that the math will work itself out eventually. It doesn't work itself out. It compounds in the wrong direction. Let's look at what the numbers actually say. not from one angle, but from several. Because this trap doesn't show up in one data set. It shows up in all of them, simultaneously, from completely different directions. Start with savings. The Federal Reserve's 2024 report on the economic well-being of U.S. households found that 37% of Americans could not cover a $400 emergency expense using cash or its equivalent without borrowing or selling something. Not $4,000. Not $40,000. $400. This is happening across income brackets, including households earning well above the national median. Now look at debt. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York reported that total U.S. consumer debt crossed $17.5 trillion in 2024. Credit card balances alone hit $1.17 trillion, the highest ever recorded. The average American carrying a credit card balance is paying somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 per year in interest alone. That is not debt for medical emergencies or job loss. The majority of that balance is discretionary spending that felt justified at the time of purchase. Now look at the income layer specifically. A 2023 Lending Club and PYMNTS survey found that 61% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck, including 45% of those earning over $100,000 annually. Nearly half of six-figure earners. People who, by any conventional measure, should have margin, should have runway, should have options. They don't. Because income without a spending philosophy doesn't accumulate. It circulates. Now look at retirement. Vanguard's 2024 How America Saves report found that the median 401k balance for Americans between the ages of 45 and 54, people within 10 to 20 years of retirement, was just $134,000. At a standard 4% withdrawal rate, that generates roughly $5,360 per year in retirement income. For people currently earning $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 annually. Each of these statistics is measuring something different. The Fed is measuring liquidity. The New York Fed is measuring debt load. Lending Club is measuring cash flow. Vanguard is measuring long-term accumulation. But they are all pointing at the same underlying reality. Earning more does not automatically produce financial security. It produces more sophisticated financial insecurity. Insecurity dressed in a better car, a nicer apartment, and a lifestyle that requires the income to continue indefinitely just to stay afloat. The "I deserve it" trap doesn't show up as a crisis. It shows up as a pattern. And by the time most people recognize the pattern, it has been running silently for a decade. Here's where it gets interesting. Because while the average high earner is carrying $23,000 in credit card debt and $134,000 in retirement savings at 50, researchers who study actual wealthy people, not people who look wealthy, but people who have quietly built and kept significant net worth, tell a completely different story. Thomas Stanley spent decades studying millionaires in America. His research, published in The Millionaire Next Door, identified a pattern so consistent it became a framework. He divided people into two categories. Pause, prodigious accumulators of wealth, and UAWs, under-accumulators of wealth. The difference was not income. It was almost never income. UAWs, the under-accumulators, earned well, spent to match, and had relatively little to show for years of solid income. Their lifestyle consumed their earnings in real time. They had the markers of success without the substance of it. Sound familiar? Pause operated differently. They had a specific, almost clinical relationship with the gap between what they earned and what they spent. They didn't experience that gap as deprivation. They experienced it as the actual point of earning money in the first place. Stanley found that Pause typically lived in homes that cost far less than they could afford, drove vehicles several years old, and spent significantly less on clothing, dining, and luxury goods than their UAW counterparts at the same income level. The research on actual millionaires tells a completely different story than the cultural image of wealth. A 2023 Ramsey Solutions study of 10,000 millionaires in the United States found that 94% of them lived on less than they earned consistently throughout their wealth-building years. Not occasionally, not after they hit a milestone. Consistently, as a practice, as a default. And 95% of them reported that their wealth was built through deliberate, repeated financial decisions, not inheritance, not a single investment, not a windfall. Here is the detail that matters most for this conversation. The majority of those millionaires reported never feeling that their spending reflected what they deserved. They rejected that framing entirely. They didn't see restraint as punishment. They saw it as precision, spending intentionally on what genuinely mattered and refusing to spend reactively on what simply felt justified in the moment. That distinction, reactive spending versus intentional spending, is the entire game. The UAW spends to reward effort already spent. The PAW spends to fund a future they are actively constructing. Same income, completely different architecture. One builds net worth. The other builds a lifestyle that requires the income to never stop. So why does this keep happening to smart, educated, financially aware people? People who know better. People who have read the articles, listened to the podcasts, and genuinely intend to save more starting next month. The answer is not arithmetic. The math is simple. The psychology is not. There are three specific mechanisms operating inside the "I deserve it" trap, and understanding them by name is the first step to breaking their grip. The first is lifestyle inflation. This is the automatic, largely unconscious process by which your standard of living expands to match every income increase you receive. You get a raise. Within 6 months, the raise is gone, absorbed into a slightly better apartment, a slightly newer car, slightly more frequent dinners out. Not because you made a conscious decision to upgrade, because upgrading felt like the natural response to earning more. Lifestyle inflation doesn't announce itself. It drifts. And every drift becomes the new baseline that the next raise has to beat just to feel like progress. The second mechanism is the hedonic treadmill. This is the well-documented psychological phenomenon in which human beings rapidly return to a stable baseline level of satisfaction regardless of positive changes in their circumstances. The new purchase feels extraordinary for days, sometimes weeks. Then it becomes normal. Then it becomes invisible. Then you need the next thing to feel the feeling again. The treadmill never stops. You can spend your entire career running on it and never actually arrive anywhere. This is why people earning 3 times what they earned a decade ago report feeling no more financially secure. The spending scaled with the earning. The satisfaction reset every time. The third mechanism is social comparison pressure. Humans are wired to benchmark their lives against the people immediately around them, colleagues, neighbors, social media feeds. When the people in your immediate circle upgrade, the pressure to match is not vanity. It is a deep, evolutionarily embedded social signal that you are falling behind the group. Researchers at Princeton found that financial well-being correlates more strongly with income relative to peers than with absolute income level. You don't feel poor because of what you earn. You feel poor because of what the person next to you is spending. These three mechanisms don't operate independently. They reinforce each other in a continuous loop. Lifestyle inflation raises the baseline. The hedonic treadmill demands the next purchase. Social comparison pressure justifies it. And sitting on top of all three, holding the whole system together, is the belief that the spending is deserved. That belief is not a personality flaw. It is a psychological trap with a very specific architecture. And traps, once mapped, can be escaped. Let's get specific. Because the "I deserve it" trap doesn't live in one dramatic purchase. It lives in categories. Recurring, normalized, socially reinforced spending categories that each feel individually reasonable but collectively consume everything. Here is where the money actually goes. Housing, the single largest activation point for the "I deserve it" belief. The average person earning $85,000 to $100,000 spends between $1,800 and $2,400 per month on rent or mortgage, frequently 30 to 35% of gross income, sometimes more. The upgrade from the functional apartment to the nicer one is almost always justified with some version of deserving it. The extra $400 per month feels manageable in isolation. Over 10 years, that decision costs $48,000 in additional rent alone, before accounting for what that money could have compounded into if invested. Housing is where the trap anchors itself because the justification feels permanent. You live there every day. Of course you deserve a nice space. Transportation. The average new car payment in the United States in 2024 hit $735 per month. Add insurance averaging $180 per month, fuel, and maintenance, and the all-in monthly cost of a newer vehicle for a middle-income earner frequently exceeds $1,100. Most of that spending is driven not by mechanical necessity, but by identity. The car you drive is visible. It signals something, and the signal feels earned. Food and experiences. This category is where the daily version of the trap operates. Restaurant meals, coffee, weekend trips, concert tickets, wine. Individually, each purchase is trivially small. Collectively, the average American household spends over $3,600 annually on dining out alone. For higher earners in urban areas, that number frequently doubles. These are the purchases most defended with deserving language. The Friday dinner. The weekend away. The thing you've been looking forward to all month. Subscriptions and lifestyle services. This is the fixed cost trap operating at its quietest. Streaming services, gym memberships, meal kits, skincare subscriptions, apps, cloud storage, professional tools. The average American now carries between $200 and $300 per month in subscription costs, most of which renew automatically, invisibly, without triggering any conscious spending decision at all. Add these four categories together for a household earning $90,000 annually. Housing at $2,100. Transportation at $1,100. Food and experiences at $600. Subscriptions at $250. That is $4,050 per month. $48,600 per year, before taxes, before utilities, before healthcare, before a single unexpected expense. On $90,000 gross, that household is not building wealth. It is maintaining a lifestyle. And every element of that lifestyle was, at some point, something they decided they deserved. Let's run the actual numbers. Because this is where the trap stops feeling like a lifestyle conversation and starts feeling like a life sentence. Meet two people, both 32 years old, both earning $90,000 per year, both starting with $8,000 in savings. Same city, same job level, same starting point in every measurable way. Person A operates inside the I deserve it trap. After housing, transportation, food, subscriptions, and the steady accumulation of justified purchases, they save $300 per month, roughly 4% of their take-home income. That feels like saving. It feels responsible. $300 a month going somewhere other than spending. Person B has examined the trap. They make deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable choices across the same spending categories. A functional apartment instead of the aspirational one. A used vehicle instead of a leased one. Intentional dining instead of reflexive dining. They save $1,500 per month, roughly 20% of take-home income. Not an extraordinary number. A historically standard savings rate for wealth-building households. Same income, same starting point. Here is what the math produces over 20 years, assuming a conservative 7% average annual return. The long-run historical average of a diversified index portfolio. Person A, saving $300 per month for 20 years at 7%, $196,000. Person B, saving $1,500 per month for 20 years at 7%, $981,000. The delta is $785,000. Not because person B earned more. Not because they had a financial advantage at the start. Because they redirected $1,200 per month, $14,400 per year, away from justified consumption and toward compounding assets. That $1,200 per month difference is the gap between the aspirational apartment and the functional one. It is the leased Audi versus the paid-off Honda. It is the $600 monthly dining budget versus the $250 one. It is the subscription stack trimmed from $280 to $80. None of those individual decisions feel like $785,000. That is precisely the problem. At 52, person A has $196,000 and a lifestyle they cannot afford to retire from. Every element of their existence requires the income to continue. The job is not optional. The grind is not optional. The stress is not optional. At 52, person B has just under $1 million, genuine options about how and whether to work, and a financial position built entirely out of the gap between what they earned and what they decided they deserved. The trap does not feel like $785,000 when you are living inside it. It feels like a reasonable Friday dinner and a lease payment you can handle. That is what makes it a trap. Escaping this trap requires uncomfortable choices. Not impossible ones, not extreme ones, but uncomfortable ones. And it is worth being honest about that rather than wrapping the solution in language that makes it sound effortless. Here is what the escape actually looks like. First, audit the justification language. For the next 30 days, every time you are about to make a discretionary purchase, notice whether the internal justification contains the words, "I deserve," "I've earned," or "I've been working hard." That language is the trap announcing itself. It is not a reason to buy. It is a signal that the purchase is emotionally driven, not financially intentional. You do not have to refuse every purchase that triggers it. You have to see it clearly before you decide. Second, separate reward from spending. The belief driving this trap is that spending is how you honor effort. That is a learned association, not a law. Rest honors effort. Sleep honors effort. Time with people you love honors effort. A walk, a meal cooked at home, an evening with no obligations. These are genuine rewards that cost almost nothing and deliver more lasting satisfaction than most purchases that run on the same justification. Build a deliberate list of rewards that do not require a transaction. Third, make the cost of the trap visible. Take your current monthly savings rate and run the 20-year compound math. Not as a punishment, as information. Most people living inside this trap have never actually calculated what their spending pattern costs them in future wealth. The number is almost always shocking enough to change behavior on its own. Visibility is the first form of accountability. Fourth, redefine what deserving looks like. This is the uncomfortable one. The culture you live inside tells you that enjoying your income means spending it visibly on things that signal success, comfort, and taste. But the people who actually build financial freedom operate on a different definition entirely. To them, deserving something means building a life where the income can eventually stop and the life continues, where the job becomes optional, where the crisis doesn't become a catastrophe. That is what they decided their effort was worth. The "I deserve it" trap is not about deprivation. It is about intention. Nobody is telling you to stop enjoying your life. The question is whether the way you are spending is actually delivering the life you are working this hard to build, or whether it is simply maintaining a version of success that requires you to keep working this hard forever. Most people trapped inside it never consciously chose it. They just never stopped to ask whether each purchase was still worth what it was actually costing them. If this video made you stop and think about a purchase you made last week, or a pattern you have been running for years without examining it, that discomfort is valuable. Do not scroll past it. Sit with it. That is where the change actually starts. The "I deserve it" trap is not a character flaw. It is not proof that you are bad with money. It is proof that you are human, operating inside a culture that has spent decades teaching you to confuse spending with reward and consumption with success. Now you can see the trap for exactly what it is. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. If you found this useful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not to call them out, but because the most valuable financial information is the kind nobody thinks to look for until it is almost too late. You found it. Pass it on. And if you want more videos that go past the surface of personal finance, past the generic budgeting tips and the advice that sounds right, but never quite explains why, hit subscribe. Every video on this channel is built the same way this one was. Real numbers, real psychology, no fluff, no shortcuts, just the honest mechanics of how money actually works and what it actually costs you when you get it wrong. The goal is not to make you feel guilty about your Friday dinner. The goal is to make sure that 10 years from now, you are looking back at a financial life you built deliberately, not one that assembled itself around you while you were busy justifying it. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.